Well, welcome everyone. This is Doug Kreitzberg here with another episode of Click Happens. Joining me is Kyle Saudi. He's our Chief Revenue Officer and EVP of Underwriting. Kyle, how are you doing?
Doing great, Doug. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic there. And we don't have Sinclair Morris, who heads up our partner relations. She's out working with partners, so that's a good thing. But want to start off today actually with something that Congress is proposing. There's a new act that's been submitted, the Cyber Deterrent and Response Act, and among other things, it would direct the agency or agencies to identify threat actors that pose a risk to U.S. interests, for lack of a better term. And we won't get into the political aspects of it or what a lot into the bill, other than it does raise a couple of issues here, and one of which is relating to OFAC, and we'll describe what OFAC is, and the other to an exclusion that's common in many insurance policies, but it has a particular reference with regards to cyber, and that is the war exclusion. So, Kyle, kind of walk us through, if you want to provide a little bit background on the act or add additional color around it, but also, what does it mean? What is OFAC, and what does that have to do with cyber and cyber insurance? And then we can take it from there.
Yeah, sounds good. Definitely good topic. And I think there's a lot of different avenues to talk about this. And I'll hit on some of the things you mentioned and then maybe add a couple other comments. OFAC is the Office of Foreign Asset Control. And for me, where they really come into play in the cyber world, so there's obviously a ton of different threat acting groups, and some are bigger than others. Some are, there's probably a tiering out there of folks that really have their stuff together and people that don't, organizations. But OFAC has, every so often you hear of OFAC sanctions, and it might be a certain country where U.S. businesses can't do business with firms in that country. And that sort of thing. But OFAC also helps out with sanctioning certain of these threat acting groups. And it kind of launches into a whole conversation, because if you are a U.S. company and you are being attacked by a threat actor, you can think of just a ransomware attack. At times, firms will decide to make an extortion payment. And again, there might be good reasons behind that. They need access to their data and they don't have good backups. Or maybe they'll pay an extortion hoping that certain critical confidential information is not released.
Right.
Well, the hard part is who is that firm behind the threat attack? It's actually a little bit rare that threat acting groups will maybe post their name. They might do that if it's more of a political attack. But if it's more of what we see mostly as financial attacks, the threat acting group just looking for financial gain, they might not actually be posting their name in the attack. So there are firms that we actually work with and other cyber insurance carriers work with that will help negotiate an extortion amount, kind of help do that whole negotiation status, where they'll be able to see different cues and identify what that firm is. Why is that important? Well, there's two reasons why that's important. One, if one of those threat acting groups are on an OFAC sanctions list, a U.S. firm technically, and also the insurance carrier technically, cannot pay that extortion amount because it's banned, which brings up a whole other situation of, well, what if that company is desperate and needs to pay it? It becomes problematic, but that's one important thing. But two, it's actually helpful for these ransomware negotiators to know the group that they're negotiating with, because they will develop kind of a playbook of how to deal with that threat acting group, which is really interesting. So let me give you an example, and I will just make up the name and an example here. But let's say this ransomware negotiating group has been dealing with kind of the same threat acting group for quite some time, and maybe they've done 10 deals with them. Maybe they know, given their data, that they can get a 50% discount in the negotiation with this one firm, this one threat acting group, compared to another threat acting group that will only budge maybe 30%. So it's kind of crazy to talk about when we're talking about, a US client that is under duress going through an attack. But like anything, unfortunately, these threat acting groups act like businesses, and they might have different, levels of how deep they're willing to go on a negotiation. And all of that information is helpful.
So if I'm a small business and I have a ransomware attack and my backups aren't good, it just, or I thought they were good and they ended up, I can't restore. Are you saying that if they're on this OFAC list that I can't pay them a ransom?
Correct. By law, you technically cannot, and technically the carrier is not allowed to pay as well. Now, again, I say that, but would a small business make a decision if they're about to go out of business to just pay it? Maybe. What kind of penalties there would be around that, I'm not quite sure. I'm guessing it would be some kind of financial fine or something like that. But it's really tough. It's really tough. Because again, in my mind, there's a lot of conversations behind, should companies pay ransom amounts? Should they never pay it? And I think until you sit in the shoes of a firm that's desperate and really going through something, and again, maybe the backups aren't there, or there's really sensitive data. Maybe they're fighting a big litigation lawsuit, and if they pay a certain amount, that information won't go public. Who am I to judge and say you should never pay an extortion in that? So
right. I mean, it comes down to a financial decision or a business decision. I would agree there, and it's easy enough to judge when you're not in that seat. There, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be investing in a good backup, because that is going to save your bacon at a lot lower cost than any ransomware attack there. So you definitely want to make sure that you do that there. But often though it's kind of tough, because a lot of these ransomware groups too are, they're kind of selling their ransomware software to a bunch of quote unquote unrelated entities. So you could be ultimately paying to somebody upstream who could be on the OFAC list, but you wouldn't know up front, right? So that could occur too.
Yeah, that's a great point. And listen, there's a level of understanding, I'll say, that how is a small firm, or even the group that's negotiating the ransom demand, they're not going to know the downstream effects, right? So I've never heard of any issue like that. If the FBI got involved and actually figured everything out down the road and saw that, there's only so much you can do there. But I think it's more awareness around the immediate threat acting group that is demanding the extortion.
Right. And then with every insurance policy, there's exclusions, and one of them is typically a war exclusion, that it won't pay. The homeowner's insurance won't pay if there's an actual war going on and your house is blown up as a result of that. And that has implications for cyber insurance, because a lot of times these threat actors have political affiliations. The question is what defines war in that situation there. Just because I get attacked by Russia, does that, when I read the newspaper, nobody told me that we're at war with Russia, but I'm being attacked, what does that constitute? How are the carriers kind of responding to that?
I'm laughing because you're taking me back to my old life, where I had to deal a lot with war exclusions. I will say this, in the smaller middle market, it's not as much of a concern, but it's been a big deal in the cyber insurance market. So I'll give you some context first. So the original war exclusion that sits in a cyber insurance policy and is generally accepted by the marketplace was actually written in during the Spanish Civil War, so like 1936. Who took that and adopted in the first cyber policy 20 or 25 years ago, I couldn't tell you. But the reason why I'm mentioning that is it shows you how like old and archaic the language is. And when you step back and you look at like why is there a war exclusion in commercial insurance and cyber insurance and that sort of thing? The reason is that insurance carriers, they're doing all of this modeling for large losses, and there is a general agreement that you cannot model unless you're writing a war product. You cannot model for a loss related to war. It's too big. You can't insure against it behind the scenes. So therefore, if a war happens and triggers all these policies, the market's going to collapse. This also is why after, it's a little different, but TRIA and terrorism after 9/11, there was a government backstop to come in to make sure the markets were okay on the go forward. But anyways, moving forward, a couple of years ago, it was really Lloyd's. Lloyd's is one of the biggest insurance markets and the oldest in the industry. But a couple markets really looked at this and said, we really need to critique or change the language because we're not changing necessarily or not trying to change our appetite on what's covered in a cyber event from war or not war, but we need to clarify in the contract, in the policy, what is covered and what's not. Because again, we're leaning on this war exclusion from 1936 before cyber was really a thing. So that was the big push. And since then, there's a couple different versions. It does get a little bit complex on what's being covered and what's not. But at the end of the day, I would say the easiest way to explain it is the clarity that markets are trying to say is, one, if there is an actual war going on and there's physical property damage and that sort of thing, that's not going to be covered under a cyber insurance policy. And that's the intent. But two, if that war leads to a cyber attack, so the easiest way to think about is Russia and Ukraine, and let's just be honest, Russia seems to have invaded Ukraine years ago, and that is a war going on. If there are cyber attacks from that crippling businesses and their cyber insurance policies, generally the war exclusion is going to kick in and not cover that type of loss. So that's kind of your easiest example of what they were looking to do with war exclusions. Now, again, there are multiple different versions out there and kind of nuances, but at the end of the day, insurance companies are just trying to clarify and saying you will be covered or you won't be covered in situations. Generally, it's accepted that cyber insurance is covering cyber attacks from threat acting groups, from some nation state groups. That's not an act of war. Those type of things have been covered for quite some time, and they'll continue to be.
Okay, so I don't have to worry if I'm a utility company and for some reason I get attacked. I click on a link that came from let's say China, and it's the government. It's not just a bunch of hackers in China, and I will be covered, assuming every other thing is it's proven to be a covered incident.
Yeah, that's the intention. Now, if tomorrow the U.S. and China declare war on each other, and
Right.
then that attack happens, that's when you're having the war exclusion kick in. But for more the one-off, the espionage warfare that's constantly going on, the war exclusion is not intending to kick that out generally.
Right. There. Well, let's hope that we don't have to talk more about the war exclusion in real terms. Obviously, another thing that seems to be coming up, and I don't know if it's an end of year thing for us, but we work with managed service providers, and a lot of them recently seem to be having questions about their how to construct their managed service agreement. It's MSA, as it's typically called, and this is almost every service provider has one of these, and whether you're managed in the IT space or not. But it basically is the contract that you use with regards to your services, and then you may amend the scope of work depending upon what you're actually doing here. But it can, it really is important from a technology errors and omissions standpoint, because obviously if you're sued, there's usually a failure to perform that's part of that, and the contract could really speak to what happens in those situations. So Kyle, as an underwriter, what do you typically look for? What would you like to see in agreement, an MSA, to evaluate, the risk and whether you would actually even write it?
Yeah, I love contracts. I should get a shirt that says I love contracts, but that's my underwriter in me. My history as an underwriter. Contracts are just important and great because at the end of the day, communication is an issue with any business, any company, any person. And to me, it's really taking everything that you're trying to do with another company and putting it down in writing and saying, look, we both agree these are the stipulations. And nobody wants to get to a place when they're working with a client or a firm or whoever else, where they're suing because there's misunderstanding of what's required or not. So in our world, as you said, managed service agreement, MSA, they're really important. And to me, there's a couple things that really stick out. So one, just really outlining the general terms and conditions. You want to outline the scope of services and be very clear, right? Maybe they agreed on a certain scope for a certain amount of work. And maybe while they're doing that, when they come to the end, the client says, oh, I also need this done. Well, it's clear in the contract whether that was agreed to for the payment amount or not. So again, that's very clear. That's an important piece. Service levels. Let's say, an MSA is working with a client and the client says, great, let's go do this. There's no contract. And, 3 months later, the client's come back saying, this isn't complete. Well, if you have a contract and you say there's a service level, this is how much time we expect it to take. Again, there's a written understanding of that and clear communication on that. I think there's client responsibilities that can be put into the MSA as well. That's important because through the work, it's going to have to be the client's going to have to give certain information or direction. So that's important. We could talk about cybersecurity requirements. That can be part of an MSA as well. Billings, fees, what all of that looks like, a time period on that. And then there could also be things like limitations of liability. If something goes wrong, how much liability is there on the managed service provider? And then I think another one you could say is maybe if a situation happens, maybe a managed service provider has the data of a client. What does that look like if there's a breach? What's the managed service providers? What are they going to cover? What are they responsible for? So that's kind of a list. There's more items, but I think at the end of the day, there's an overarching theme of there's clarity and communication written down, and both sides are agreeing to it and signing to it, so that there's not confusion if and when something goes wrong.
Right. And I think you mentioned limitation of liability. I think that's important. That you're not as providing a lot of guarantees within the agreement that could end up, in you're agreeing to guarantees that perhaps you have no control over. That's first and foremost, and that you have to be careful of establishing what you're promising, and then also on the limitation side. And I've seen some where the at least contractually, what you're agreeing to is that if we fail to perform, your our liability is limited to the contractual value of the services that we provided, so that you're not looking to you're trying to limit those losses to only what the business value, what you got, and and what they paid basically.
Yeah.
Now that may not always work because sometimes the damages to a client may exceed those services, and they would have to prove that there. But that's a good way to limit it there. And I think safe to say that you should always have an attorney review that. Correct, Kyle?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think what a firm should do is create like a boilerplate managed service agreement. And then from there, maybe your clients are just going to sign that regardless, or maybe they're going to come back with some negotiations of their own. And like you said, you should always have an attorney or law firm, look at that, edit it, change it, that sort of thing. It's going to save you money in the long run because unfortunately, as we all know in business, things don't always go exactly as planned. So that there are some big protections there. But Doug, you mentioned this in the beginning. I mean, it is a key underwriting piece. Underwriters, carriers, they're looking at that the same way on cyber insurance. They're maybe looking for, like, do you have EDR, MFA? That on the tech E&O piece, the professional services that they're covering, they're looking for, do you have an MSA in place? Do you have these contractual obligations? Because they know through their experience, it's just going to provide better protection and, again, clarity and communication.
Right. Exactly. I was reading something just on another topic. Obviously, it's not unusual that you could read anything about AI these days. It's hard not to. It's hard not to read something that you just generated via AI here. But it was really talking about what defenses you need, system defenses you need to have with AI. And how challenging it is these days to really define that. And what the author was really referencing was the fact that you already have computer security and there's certain defenses related to it. What additional do you need to defend against AI? Here, and I think they make a good point in that at the end of the day, it still comes down to, do you know what you have in the environment, right? So do you have shadow IT, as they call it, or shadow LLMs now? Do you know if people are using chat or they're using Claude or any of these tools in your environment? And then what data do they have access to? Are they able to kind of go through, or do they have connections into your database to run, their analysis there? And how do you know that data isn't being exposed beyond just the LLM to other people? There's been issues where people would share their chat with someone else, and the chat just includes all the data that they kind of rolled up into the analysis. So that can get exposed. So these are, in some respects, just basic blocking and tackling that you should be doing today here. And Kyle, as you think about it, what are other issues that they may not be thinking about, or as you think about AI, what are the exposures out there that we should be thinking about trying to defend ourselves against?
Yeah, the one thing when you were talking about that, it made me think back to, like, AI is the new tag word, and yes, I think AI is going to be transformative for businesses and everyone on the go forward. But everything you were talking about just goes back to good procedures, right?
Right.
Even before AI, it was, okay, do you know what systems are running in your system? Like, do you know which applications or different are running in your system? You need to know that to make sure that they have the most up-to-date antivirus protection, and that maybe there's EDR endpoints on them. That's no different whether it's AI or not. You just talked about data. I think we talked about this maybe 2 weeks ago. Data classification policies, like, where is your data? What kind of data you have? Do you scrub it? All of that stuff. Like that is regardless of whether it's AI or something else. You go back to really good cyber hygiene, and you're going to be in a better place. Now, I think the thing with AI is it's so fast that it can transform items very quickly. So yeah, that's important. But back to your question of what should we be concerned about when it comes to AI. I mean, my biggest concern is just cyber attacks. And again, in my own experience, harnessing and utilizing AI in our daily business and the great things that I use AI for, it is pretty scary when you think about it in the hands of a threat actor, and what they're training their models, where I may be training it for efficiencies in my daily business interactions. They're sitting there, with the evil, their evil hat on and saying like, okay, I want you to focus on this one, I don't know, deficiency in, the cyber chain and that. So that's where my head really goes. It's very concerning how quickly AI can be used in a bad way. My hope is that, good firms are using it equally to help prevent those attacks.
Right. Yeah. And I think for many businesses, if you're thinking about what do I need to defend myself against from an AI perspective, just you don't have to think much beyond what you're already being told. It's still the low hanging fruit of making sure you've got your identities managed, that you know who's in your environment, that you know what data you have, do you know what systems you have, and that you're managing it appropriately here. Training your people not to click on links. It becomes, it's just more difficult with the deep fakes and the things that you hear, but it's still, we all have to be cognizant that at any time anyone, is out to try to get take stuff from us there.
Are you an overly paranoid person when it comes to emails and links?
I have to say that I pay a lot of attention to them, whether I'm overly or appropriately paranoid. I don't know. You seem to, I get a few emails from you saying, I don't know if this is real or not. And
Doug, I'm not going to be the one that clicks and brings our. I say that. I hope I'm not, and I rather be like Doug. Doug is like, yeah, it's fine. Than the opposite. So.
Right. Just as long as you know which Doug is responding.
Well, for those watching in, Doug and I have a secret secondary means, right?
That's right. We have our analog approaches here, there, but it is a it's tough to you need to get business done. We're in a digital age, and so you have to get it done through technology. You just have to be cognizant that there are certain things that and exposures there, and try not to do try not to fall for the stupid things, and as much as you can. But with that, I really appreciate your time in listening to us. Kyle, appreciate you joining and your insights as always, and look forward to catching up a week from now. All right.
Thanks, Doug.
Guys.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye.